Okay, it's time to talk about the nervous system. We're going to introduce it. Are you ready? So first, what do you already know about the nervous system? Think about it. In class, we'll talk about it. So what is the nervous system? Well, you may know a little bit about it already, but it is a fast electrochemical communication network. So communication, fast, and it uses chemicals and electrical impulses. A lot going on. So what are the functions of the nervous system? So we're going to break it down into three main functions. First is sensation. What does that mean? Well, that means it has to do with the stimulus. So we're picking up the signal. But that signal could be inside the body, like, oh my goodness, the temperature is too high, or oh my goodness, your blood sugar is low. Or it could be a change outside the body in the environment. Okay, so we use our five senses: vision, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, or it's something happening inside our body. And then we have integration. And integration means I'm interpreting the change. I'm interpreting the stimuli. I'm interpreting that sensory input. So I recorded a temperature of 99.7. Now what? Okay, I have to interpret. Is that too high? Is that too low? What do I need to do? Okay, I saw this, I heard this, I tasted this. What do I need to do? So I have to interpret those changes to determine what my next step is. My next step is the response. So it is my reaction to the stimulus. Usually that means it's going to be a muscle contraction. Like if I touch something hot, I might move away, or it might be a hormone secretion to make an adjustment. So what are the main divisions of the nervous system? Well, the central nervous system, the CNS. It consists of the brain and the spinal cord. And then we have the PNS, or peripheral nervous system. So what does that mean? Well, literally the rest of the nerves. So it's any nerve that's not in the brain and not in the spinal cord. So the peripheral nervous system has the job of sensing changes and carrying out the responses. And the central nervous system really has the job of that interpretation, right? Deciding what to do. What is the functional unit of the nervous system? Like, how is the nervous system able to do those functions? How are we able to do sensation and integration and response? Like, what's the unit that makes it happen? Well, that would be the neuron. The neuron is the functional unit of the nervous system. They are the longest cells in the body. Remember, we have one that goes from the very tip of your spine to the tip of your toe. That's a pretty long distance. A neuron can transmit signals from 1.2 to 250 miles per hour. That's pretty fast. We have about 100 billion neurons in the brain alone. Okay, and you'll see varying numbers when you Google it, so 70, 80, 85, whatever. But we'll say roughly around 100 billion neurons in the brain alone. What are the main types of neurons? Well, they kind of tie to those functions. Remember those? So one of the functions was sensation. So not surprisingly, we have sensory neurons. Okay. And a sensory neuron is going to go from a receptor to the brain and spinal cord. And then remember, we had the response. So we need motor neurons, and they're going to go from the brain and spinal cord to a muscle or gland. And then remember the integration. So we have interneurons, and interneurons are found in the CNS, in the central nervous system, in the brain and in the spinal cord, and they make connections. So here you can see the whole system. Let me just grab this. So we have a receptor like in the skin, for example, and then this sensory neuron brings the signal. Okay, an interneuron in the spinal cord is going to do some of that integration, that interpretation. What can happen here, though, also is, and I'm horrible drawing three-dimensionally, but this could go up to the brain as well, okay? So it's not just one little thing like this is happening, multiple things that could be happening at the same time, this being my horrible little brain drawing. So again, sensory receptor in the skin, it travels down a sensory neuron, then to an interneuron in the spinal cord, and also being sent to the brain for interpretation. So if it's like a reflex, your body's going to respond before you necessarily know what's happening, but then you do feel the heat. Okay, you do have a conscious understanding of what happened. So it obviously did go to the brain. It just doesn't go to the brain first. Okay, some things do go to the brain first, but not when we're talking about reflexes. But again, receptors in the skin, sensory neuron, interneuron, and then we have a motor neuron, and then the effector is what it is responding with, so a muscle or a gland, for example. All right, so let's look at the parts of a neuron. So the neuron is the functional unit. So let's look at the parts of a neuron, and a neuron is a nerve cell. So first we have the cell body, or the soma, and it holds the nucleus and the other organelles. So it's a big, right here, the soma, the cell body. Then we have the dendrites. These little branches, all kinds of them. So they receive and pick up signals. So there's going to be lots of connections here, and the dendrites are going to pick up signals from other neurons or from receptors. And then we have the axon. Okay, that is this long part right here that starts here and goes all the way down here. And the axon is going to transmit or send the signal. So these dendrites are these little tree branchy things. They're picking up the signals, sending it down the axon. And then we have axon terminal. So that means the end of the axon. Sometimes they're called terminal buttons. Okay, but the axon terminal is where neurotransmitters are stored to relay the signal, wherever that signal is going. Is it going to another neuron? Is it going to a gland? Is it going to a muscle? Whatever's happening. So the neurotransmitters are stored there to transmit the signal, to relay it to the next step. All right, and then we have myelin sheath, which a lot of our neurons are wrapped in myelin. Myelin covers the axon. It's produced by Schwann cells. So this is the myelin, but this right here, you can see that's the nucleus of the Schwann cell. So what is myelin? Well, it's an insulating layer or sheath that surrounds many nerves. Myelin is produced by specialized glial cells. Remember that word? Anyway, those glial cells are called the Schwann cells. So you can see myelin, but then you can also see the nuclei of the Schwann cells. And the myelin forms this wrapping around the neuron. So why? Because see these little gaps right here? They're called nodes of Ranvier. And what happens is when this signal is transmitted, that's going to make it go faster. Why? Well, let's see. So look right here. Do you see the signal, how much faster it happens when there's myelin? Because what happens is it can skip this part with the myelin coating. It can kind of go jump, 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 node to node. And that is far faster than trying to make sure the signal transmits down the entire length of the neuron. Why? Because electrochemically what's happening is ions are moving in and out for this signal to be transmitted. So if I can just skip and just do that at the nodes, oh my goodness, way faster. So where do neurons connect? Well, they connect at a location called the synapse. Neurons don't touch. So think about if you ever had a sibling or cousin and he was like this And you're like, don't touch me. And you're like, I'm not touching you, but they're holding their finger infinitely close to you, but legitimately not touching you. That's how neurons are. Okay, so they get infinitely close, but they do not actually touch each other. So think about like that annoying sibling. Nope, they don't touch you. They just get so infinitely close. And that infinite closeness, that's the synapse. Okay. I'm not touching you. Well, they're literally not. So what has to happen then, how is the signal transmitted if they're not touching? Well, we have these neurotransmitters, these chemicals that get released, remember, from those axon terminals, and they get released into the synapse, and then the neurotransmitters cross the gap, and they transmit the signal to the next neuron, to the muscle, to the gland, whatever has the receptors. And so the neurotransmitters are the things that are crossing that gap, crossing the synapse, okay? Not the neurons touching each other. So the neurons don't actually touch each other. So the signal comes down the neuron, down the neuron, down the neuron, down the neuron, gets really close, lets out neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters cross the gap. We're going to learn more about neurotransmitters in a future lesson. So that's it. That's an introduction to the nervous system. I hope you learned something new today.